Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this. Welcome to the Sales Academy of Capital City College Group workshop on building rapport. So in this workshop, we're going to be looking at some of the things that constitute what is rapport building. It's a term I'm sure we're all aware of, and we all have our own definition of it, but we'll be looking at actually what rapport is. We'll be looking at what rapport isn't as well. And we'll be looking at ways that we can effectively build rapport with anyone that we might have the desire to do so with. So obviously this is very much geared towards how we operate in front of our clients, whether it be a sales meeting or speaking with them over the phone, and however you might do that. But then when you think about it, really you want to be able to build rapport with anyone within your organization at some point or another. So it might be your manager, your peers and your colleagues, and there's certainly going to be people in your personal life you want to improve how you communicate with as well. So building rapport is a fundamental skill when it comes to sales or communication, influence and persuasion. Okay, it's a fundamental skill. So I hope you get a lot of value out of this workshop. So our objectives are very much to look at, as I've said, understanding what rapport actually is, what is the definition of rapport, and why it is important. And then we'll be looking at 3 components of communication, after which we can then learn how to develop different ways to build rapport with our clients, or in fact, anyone. So what is rapport? So I think we all know that we have our idea of what rapport is, and if you ask 100 people, I think there'll all be slight deviations from the definition, but all geared towards the same sort of thing. The Oxford English Dictionary defines rapport as such a close and harmonious relationship in which the people or groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. And I think the last portion of that definition is really, really apt. It's about understanding each other's feelings, and it's certainly about communicating well. As I like to call it, it's about being in sync with another human being. Okay, so you have all experienced rapport with an individual or a group of people before, but maybe you haven't necessarily been aware of how it's occurred. You just assume that it's this natural thing that occurs, and it is. And what we're going to look at today is how we can take that naturally occurring thing that we call rapport, and how can we consciously create that with anyone, so that we don't limit the people that we can have rapport with. We don't become a creature of circumstance, so that we decide we either have rapport with this person or we don't. We can actually choose to create rapport with another human being, which I think you'll agree is a pretty valuable skill to have. Okay, so moving on, what is rapport? Well, we need to understand the principle that when people are in rapport, it's generally with somebody that they like, or somebody that they feel connected to. And people generally like people whom are like themselves in some way. They share particular characteristics or traits. Or, to go one stage further, people like people whom are like themselves, or who are how they would like to be. So sometimes we build rapport with people who have characteristics or traits that we would like to have. We look up to them, we admire a certain characteristic that they carry with them, and we look up to that, and as such we feel connected to that human being. And if you think about people that you have rapport with now, then you'll probably realize that, that person's actually a lot like me in some ways. That's probably why we have rapport. Or you have rapport with somebody, you feel connected to an individual that has certain skills, traits, characteristics that you wish you had in some way. Okay, so the chances are, if you're thinking of someone that you have rapport with, they fit into that category. Okay, and equally, if there's individuals, and I'm sure there are, that you don't have rapport with, now that doesn't mean you don't like them, it just means that you might not feel connected to them in the same way. So think about those individuals that maybe you struggle to get in sync with. Chances are they're probably quite different to you in some way, okay? Or they have characteristics that you don't admire and you don't wish to have as well. Okay? So really all this comes down to is When we have that feeling of being in sync, we have that feeling of being like someone, we have that thing in common. So it's really important to remember that rapport is created by a feeling of commonality, that thing in common. Now, it's very easy to confuse this with what I call surface level rapport, which is the kind of things that you can't control, the kind of things like supporting the same football team, or you went to the same school, or you know the same people, or these kind of things that you're hoping might come up in conversation so that you can go, aha, I know them as well, or I support that team as well. Now, these are things that you can't control. You kind of just have to wait to happen. And unfortunately, I see a lot of salespeople, or people in general, kind of wait for that thing, whatever that thing in common, to occur, to surface, before they decide that they can build rapport with another human being. And it works, but it really limits the amount of people that you can build rapport to. So you want to be able to build rapport, with almost anyone and everyone that you come into contact with. Potentially, you want the potential to be able to do that. So you can't rely on just these circumstantial situations or evidence to crop up in conversation before you decide to build rapport with it. It's not going to work all the time. There is, however, something that does work all the time, or almost all the time, and it's called matching and mirroring. It's called matching and mirroring. And matching and mirroring was discovered by a psychologist, a pioneer of psychotherapy, genius called Milton Erickson. That's him in the background there. And what he did is he spent an enormous amount of time studying people, as psychotherapists often do. He had to, because he couldn't get about. He actually had polio as a child, so he spent an enormous amount of time in a wheelchair. And all he could do was really study people from a very young age. And one of the things he started to notice is that when people got into rapport, when people had that feeling of commonality, when they got into sync, he observed that they started to, without being aware of it, they started to match each other's body language and their tone of voice, and even their language would subtly change without them being aware of it. They would become in sync. He called it, they mirrored each other. They started to become like mirror images of one another when they were in rapport. And he thought, well, that's really interesting. So I wonder if I reverse engineer this process, and if I start to match and mirror people, will I then start to build rapport? And he did. And he kind of revolutionized the way that psychotherapists engaged their clients, and he was enormously successful as the person who could build rapport with anybody. He could build rapport with his clients by taking note of how they would move, how they would speak, and I'll make sure I illustrate this very clearly. Subtly, he would start to mirror and match their language. Now be aware that I'm being very careful not to mention the word mimic, because it's not about copying to a comedic level or in a way that patronizes another human being. If you mimic and go overboard with this, it will become obvious, and you'll actually break rapport. You'll actually break rapport by doing so. So make sure that you keep it very, very subtle and low key. You only need to match one or two things, and we'll be looking into this. So matching is quite simply, you match a person's body movements. If they move their right arm, you move your right arm, for example. Whereas mirroring is you become the mirror image of that person, particularly if you are sitting directly opposite. There is a purpose for both, but it's probably not worth you concerning yourself too much with making sure you're getting your left and right coordinated. What's important is that you learn to observe the people that you're communicating with, and you can then respond in kind. So let's look at that for a bit. So there are three ways that we communicate with human beings. This comes from Albert Marabin. He was a psychologist in the 1980s. He did design this chart for those that are in what he called social relationships or intimate relationships. So take this with a pinch of salt, because the corporate world absorbed this and thought that it was a golden nugget. And while it is useful, it's important to remember the context of which this was designed. So the three main forms of communication that we use is your tone of voice, your body language, and your words. quite simply. They are the three ways that you can convey your message to another human being. But they're not all equal. In fact, your tone of voice accounts for 38% of what you say, okay, or your message. That's the communication that through your tone of voice accounts for about 38% of what a person will absorb, okay. So it's pretty powerful, particularly if you're speaking on the phone, right? Your body language, on the other hand, accounts for 55% of our communication. So people are kind of paying attention to 55% of your body language. Okay, so if you couldn't speak, for example, more than half your message would probably get across in the way you use your physiology. Okay, a massive portion. So we'll be looking at that. And maybe some of you are surprised to know that language only really plays a small part at 7% of the message that we communicate. Now, if you think about this, it's really because language, is relatively new compared to how we use our bodies. We've had arms and legs before we had language, and we've been making noise somewhere in between there. So as a species, we're hardwired to be able to read someone's body language and quickly ascertain what they're trying to communicate to us. Are they friend, are they foe? So this is very much a primal instinct which feeds into here, whereas words, they kind of came a lot later. So with that in mind, let's look at some of those qualities of the tone of voice, okay? And I choose this one first because I'm aware that most of you are probably setting appointments or meetings over the phone, or maybe even doing a whole sales cycle over the phone. So tone of voice is going to play a massive part of how you build rapport with another human being, more than body language in this context, okay? So I want you to consider some of the qualities of a voice, of any one person's voice, that you could potentially match or mirror, okay? So a tone of voice, your voice has certain qualities in it that we can then imitate. And again, I say imitate, I should use the words match and mirror because it's not about mimicking, but that we can certainly listen out for and start to feed back to our client or to our prospect. So here's a few of them. So naturally, your actual tone of voice, everyone has a different tone of voice, I think you'd agree, or a different pitch, if you will. Some people speak at quite a high pitch, low pitch, and various degrees in between. Okay, it's really important that if somebody has a distinctive tone of voice, that you try your best to, where possible, meet that tone of voice. Okay, because that's a massive builder of rapport. And in fact, I remember on the live webinar, if you did partake in that, you might recall me mentioning the series, the sitcom Friends. Okay, so in the sitcom Friends, which isn't on anymore, but it's hugely successful in the States, there was a character, a minor character, a recurring character called Janice, who was a nice character. There was nothing really wrong with her character as such. She seemed nice enough. But unfortunately, she wasn't particularly liked by the other characters. She could not build rapport with a lot of the other characters, so much so that it was funny. And the reason she couldn't build rapport with her other friends, if you will, or the other people in the cast, was because she had what was considered a very annoying tone of voice. Okay, she had this laugh, she had this way of speaking that people just kind of shuddered at, and it was breaking rapport so much that that was the comedy in it. Okay, so there's how an example of having the wrong tone of voice can really grate on people, and maybe leaving, people who have that dead as drill tonality that just drives you up a wall. Doesn't matter what they say, they just drive you nuts because of their tone of voice. So be aware that your clients and prospects are very much like that as well, but they will never really feel grated by a tone of voice which is the same as theirs, matches their own. Okay? You also have tempo. So some people like to speak very, very quickly, and some people like to speak quite slowly. And again, there's various degrees within that as well. What's important here is that typically people who speak quickly do so because they are in a state where they are processing information quickly. So if you deliver your lines of dialogue in a very deliberately slow way to a fast talking person, you can often find them getting irritated and frustrated because you're not meeting their pace. And in fact, if you look at things like cartoons or again, overtly over the top comedy, a very slow tone of voice, or a very slow pace of voice, I should say, is often insinuated with low intelligence. Okay, now of course that's not true, but it is important that if you have a fast talking person and you speak slowly, they may interpret you as, come on, pick up the pace. They may see you as lethargic, they may see you as lazy. So make sure that you meet their tone of voice so that you are displaying that you have the same sense of urgency as they do. And equally, if you speak very, very quickly to someone who naturally is a bit of a more, a more slow-paced speaker, then you may well be seen as obnoxious and as trying to create urgency, and that kind of fits into the stereotype of salespeople, the fast-talking salesperson. So, I'm not saying you should speak quickly or slowly at, all the time. It's about making sure that you speak at the pace which is relevant to your customer or your prospect. And with that, volume is very much similar. You will have prospects and clients and people that you meet that speak very, very loudly. And if you meet that volume, or that volume to some extent, you will be seen to share the same level of power that they have, rather than be a meek speaking individual that they might think is not going to actually be able to get the job done because they speak so quietly. It's an interesting perception that people have about quiet speaking people. That is, unless of course you are speaking to a quiet talking person, and you certainly don't want to drown them out because that will be seen as obnoxious. With that, we also have rhythm. So by rhythm I mean the cadence and the flow of what you speak. Some people have a very nice harmonic rhythm to their voice, and they're like natural narrators, right? I think Morgan Freeman and David Attenborough, they have a very nice flow and cadence to what they say. Some of your prospects will share that quality, and some of them will kind of have more of a staccato, kind of more jagged approach to speaking. Again, it's important that you kind of reply in kind to maybe the rhythm that they are using. And the last one is origin. Now, don't confuse this with origin of their voice in terms of like their accent, where they're from. Okay. In fact, I make a point here that if you try to match or mirror or mimic someone's accent, you risk breaking rapport, even if you think you're pretty good at it. There's just actually no need for it. So this doesn't mean that if you're speaking to someone with an accent, you copy that accent. Absolutely not. But the origin is actually where in the body is the voice coming from. Okay, so do they speak from their chest? Do they speak from their diaphragm? Do they speak through their nose? This is a really hard one to do unless you're a trained vocalist. To kind of move the origin of your voice is not something that's natural to most people. So while I don't want to concern you with this too much, it's worth noting that people speak from different parts of their body, their chest, their throat. And if you can speak from that part of the body as well, you'll find yourself having a natural rhythm, volume, and kind of cadence to the voice which matches there. But I certainly wouldn't urge you to try and mimic someone's origin unless you feel really confident in your ability to do so. Okay, so there's some qualities of the voice. There's probably more, but there's some of the more common qualities of the voice that if you can match and mirror those to your clients and to people you're speaking with, you stand a chance of building some good rapport. And then we move on to body language. Now, body language is not going to be appropriate for phone meetings, but it will play a part in your actual physical meetings that you have with clients. And to some extent, certainly when if you are at this stage conducting video calls, where they can see you, or at least the top half of you to some extent, then also your body language is going to play something of a part here as well. So this is all about the physical body. What aspects of the physical body can you match and mirror in your client? So it's all going to be like movements to some degree, right? So first one is posture. Let's say you're sitting opposite somebody who's kind of slouched in the chair. For you to be upright, you're not at their level. You're not actually you might make them feel a bit on edge. Now, in a business professional setting, of course, you always want to have good posture. You want to have strong professional posture. But consider how they are sitting or standing, where their shoulders are, where their hips are. And if you can match and mirror that, you'll portray the same image as them. And facial expressions. So obviously we've got 1,001 facial expressions that are always changing. So with this one, it's really important to take note of the facial expressions they use when they're in a state that you want to replicate. So let me give you an example. Let's say that someone is speaking about something that's really exciting to them. Take note of their facial expressions, and you can then use those and feed those back to the individual when you want them to feel excited. Okay, because if that's the face that they make when they're excited, then you want them to re-access that state when you talk about your product or service, right? So there's going to be a lot of observing of your client at first time, and take into account the context to which they're using these facial expressions. I'll move down a little bit and go to gestures, because gestures works very much in the same way. People are really strange actually with gestures. People have their own, sometimes they have their own unique gestures that are completely unique to them, that they just create. And it's interesting when you watch someone's hands. I mean, gestures normally come from the hands, right? And again, consider, when do they use gestures? So, for example, I have a colleague that when they're talking about something, well, they do this gesture where they kind of put their palms together and they kind of point downwards a little bit, like they form like an arrowhead with their hands. I don't think they're aware that they're doing it, but I am, and I'm aware that they do it when they feel particularly confident. Okay, so for me, that's the body's way. That's this person's body's way of saying, you know, when I'm confident, I do this little gesture. So what I do is, whenever I'm sharing an idea with them, something that I want to convince them potentially, I'm aware that if I do this little gesture back to them, their brain unconsciously goes, oh, okay, that means confidence. So I can feel confident at that idea. Really interesting. So take into account not just the gestures they do, but when and where they do them. Okay, because that's really important. Context is really important. Proximity. So proximity really is how close you get to another human being. Now we all know that, you know, we kind of have our own personal bubble, right? And that's very individual to everybody, and we don't like people invading in our personal space. So proximity is probably more one to be aware of, so that you don't break rapport. Okay, so if you get a sense that you are encroaching into someone's personal kind of space, you should be able to tell. Use your common sense. Use your, what we call, your sensory acuity. If you see, you know, maybe their muscles in their neck tense up a little bit, or then back away sort of slightly, you know that you're getting too close. I think we all know individuals maybe that aren't aware of this, who have a habit of breaching people's personal space, and it makes us feel uncomfortable. Right now, that's certainly not something that you want to be doing with your clients. So just take note that everyone has their kind of little safe zone, and you should respect that and kind of stay away from that. That said, you don't want to, you know, go, oh, I'll play it safe and I'll stand in the corner of the room, because you'll never build rapport from such a distance. So it's important to kind of find that place where they're comfortable with you, where you can get close enough for them to feel close to you, but not so much so that you might be invading their personal space. So just be aware of proximity. And touch as well kind of goes along with that. So with touch one, the right touch at the right time can be enormously powerful, but please do use this one with caution, because you do not want to get a reputation as the toucher, as the person who just goes around inappropriately touching people. Again, a bit like proximity, in order to touch someone, you do need to invade their personal space. So you need to do so when rapport is satisfactory. The best advice I can give with touch is to take into account how the person touches other people, if they do. So you might have colleagues or clients that have a habit of touching their colleagues or peers, and by that I mean, you know, like they might clasp their elbow or pat them on the back, or whatever it might be. Take into account whether they do that, and take into account when and where they do that. Again, context really important, so that you know that this person, if this person's comfortable with a hand on the back occasionally, then you can put a hand on the back as well when you deliver a line that you want them to you know, kind of really be impactful, and that's going to be safe. You're not going to get a sexual harassment lawsuit. Okay, and the last one, I'll leave this one to last because it's actually the most powerful. I believe it's the most powerful, is breathing, and it's the most powerful because it's the most subtle. Quite simply, no one's ever really going to catch you matching their breathing. Now, it's really hard to do in some instances, particularly if you're untrained at this. So if you are sitting square opposite somebody, you kind of want to check as much as you can how their shoulders are rising and falling, and you want to match the pace of their breathing. Okay, because that's a really, really powerful rapport building tool that works unconsciously. I cannot tell you how useful this one is. Ideally, if you are sitting kind of at a right angle to somebody, or maybe slightly side on, you might be able to see their chest move. Okay, but if you are square on across the table, it's going to be a bit more difficult. It's also difficult, even if you can gauge the pace at which someone is breathing. Actually, the art of mirroring that breathing can be quite difficult because it can seem quite unnatural to us. Nobody likes breathing slower than their normal pace. You start running out of air and your face turns blue and stuff like that. So use this one again if you've got good breathing control, because it is enormously powerful. So the next one is verbal language. So obviously you're trading words with somebody. I know that we've said that words might only play a small portion of communication, but as I said, take that with a pinch of salt, because the right words and the right language is enormously powerful for persuasion. It's why there's going to be a workshop on subliminal language and language to use in sales. It is actually more powerful, I think, than Marabin suggested in that chart that we saw earlier. And if you're over the phone, obviously they're going to be listening to what you say as well. Hopefully they're listening to what you say. So aspects of their language, I'll explain these ones because maybe these are terms that are not so familiar with you. So terminology is quite simply when an individual has key words that they kind of bring up and again and again and again. So there's terminology which is relevant for a sector, right? There are words that if you work in a particular industry, there's that kind of terminology, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is key phrases and words that an individual might use, and we'll revisit this somewhat, that indicate how they're feeling. So they might use, I certainly know in recruitment, an industry that I was in, that people wanted to hit the ground running, that kind of thing. So I know that means something. So if I said, oh, they're a really good self-starter, to me that kind of means the same thing, hitting the ground running, self-starter, but to the other person, they want to hear somebody who can hit the ground running. So it's just take into account the adjectives that they use. If they describe something, they want something, they want a beautiful home, don't show them a fantastic house, because it's not necessarily what they want. Okay, it might mean the same thing to you, but not to the other person. Moving on, common experiences. So I mentioned this very, very early on. These are naturally occurring. You can't create common experiences unless you're going to lie about things, and I would never suggest you do that. So common experiences, should they occur, they can build rapport. But there's no real conscious, direct way of you kind of unearthing that. You need to let them organically surface in conversation, which you kind of need to be in rapport for that to happen in the first place. You also have values and beliefs. Now, this is an interesting one because values and beliefs form an integral part of our psychology, of our identity, of who we are. So if you share the same values and beliefs as another individual, you stand a massive chance of building rapport with them. However, how can this come up in everyday conversation? Well, you can use, because you might not understand someone's values and beliefs if you've just met them for a brief period of time, but I think you'd agree that there are some universal values and some universal beliefs, universal meaning everybody shares them pretty much, some safe values and beliefs that you can throw out there that should resonate with your audience. So for example, if you were to say, I think you'd agree that stealing is wrong, for example. It's a bit of a poor example out of context, but I think you would agree that most people would agree with that sentence. So you are sharing that you have a belief and a value that they should share as well. Okay, so if you can think of some common ground that you think they might have in their value and belief systems, and that's going to be quite powerful as well. In the top right hand corner there, I've got content chunks, and that's kind of generally like the chunk of information that they deliver to you. So some people like to speak in very short sentences, and some people like to go on these long monologues, and there'll be people in between. Now, what's important is that we should be listening more than we're speaking, absolutely, but we should take into account how this person can digest information. So if people can digest, maybe they say 3 chunks of information at once. They do like verbal bullet points. You know what I mean? Like where they'll tell you something and then they'll have the magic number 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you want to respond when you do your presentations with similar chunks of content. And the last one, predicates, maybe a term that you're not familiar with. Predicates really actually refers to how they process information at an unconscious level, and we're going to look into this one right now. So predicates really refers to something that we have in our neurology known as representational systems. Representational systems, rep systems I call them, and they're basically your senses. Okay, so like your sense of touch, your sense of feeling, your sense of hearing, because that's how you process information. That's how you experience the world that you live in. Okay, you do so through these systems. You do so by what you can see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. So we can, and we use these representational systems in our language. Particularly, we use our visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So when we're describing our experience, when we are describing and speaking with somebody, we use language which is visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. Now we can use language which is also relating to our sense of smell and taste as well, but they play a much less important role in our representational systems. These are the core three that I'm going to go over with you now. Okay, so I think you'll all agree that there are people who describe themselves as a visual person. Okay, maybe you're one of them. Okay, maybe yeah, I'm a visual person, or maybe you're a hands-on person, like somebody who likes to do stuff. We'd call you a kinesthetic person. Okay, and then we all fly between all of these systems at any one time, right? But there's kind of one or two dominant systems there that you might say, you know what, I'm a very visual person. Well, maybe you haven't noticed this, but you probably use a lot of visual language. You probably use a lot of visual language. And by visual language, I mean words like this. Then you probably do so without realizing. And that's the point. It happens at a level that is kind of unconscious, really, really powerful. But if I was speaking to a visual person, I'd certainly be listening out for words like this. And this is a non-exhaustive list, by the way, but things like focus, obviously look and see, clear or vague, or to imagine or observe, vision, that kind of thing. All these words suggest that the person I'm speaking to is a visual type person. And simply what I want to do, if I'm matching and mirroring, is if I ascertain that this person is a visual person, I want to start using these words more regularly, because I know that they will resonate with that person. I know that they will make sense to that person. Okay? That they'll get a, they'll kind of get a clear view of what I'm trying to say. And then there are those people that are what we consider auditory people. These are people who like to be kind of told. They like to listen to podcasts. They tend to like music more so than visual and kinesthetic people. They like to listen to speakers. Okay, so they like to entertain and stimulate their auditory sense, and they will use what we call auditory language, which rather than see and look and clear in that kind of language, it's more things like to announce, to listen, to tell, to orchestrate. Have you ever heard of anyone saying that I want to orchestrate something? That doesn't mean they actually want to be in an orchestra, be like the conductor or anything, but they're using that word to describe something else, and that can allude to the fact that they might well be an auditory person. So if I'm speaking with somebody who I ascertain is auditory, I will make sure that I kind of start filling my vocabulary with these types of words and terms. Now, obviously, these are just words in a minute, and you're thinking, well, how can I use this in everyday conversation? I will show you later on. And the last one is kinesthetic. So those people who are what they consider more of a feeling person. Okay, there are words that they tend to use in their language, like feel, like touch, to grasp something maybe hard or soft or light or heavy. These are all words to do with like feeling, right? Solid or concrete. If anyone's ever said to you that idea is solid, sounds solid, that's like, okay, well that's a touchy kind of word, isn't it? It's a kinesthetic type of word. So if they use enough of these words and you're kind of looking for two or three mentions, two or three indicators, with any one sort of minute or portion of dialogue for you to be sure. You don't just want to listen out. Oh, yeah, oh, they said touch, so they must be kinesthetic. You kind of want to listen out for a couple of them and see which one surfaces the most where you can. So this is really about practicing your active listening skills. Listening for the terms that indicate, are they auditory, are they kinesthetic, or are they visual? So what words do I need to use? Now, words aren't enough, really. You're probably thinking, how am I going to put this into my dialogue? Well, I can't tell you exactly because that's your dialogue, but I can give you some phrases that might help put this into a bit of a contextualized chunk, as it were. So let's take visual, for example. So we've moving along from just the words that they might use. Let's look at them in like chunks of phrases and key phrases that a person might say if they're a visual person. So they might say things like this. They might say things like, to get perspective on something, okay? Or they want to see the big picture, okay? Or a bird's eye view. Making a scene, showing off. Tunnel vision. If anyone's ever said the word tunnel vision to you in some way, it might suggest that they're a visual person or they're in a visual state. So naturally, as you probably guessed by now, that you want to use phrases which are quite similar. Okay. So if somebody says, can you show me this again? I'm not sure it's very clear. It seems a bit foggy to me, right? Those are visual kind of phrases. You want to respond with something like this. Yeah, let me paint you a picture. Okay. Let me paint you a picture, or I'll give you a bird's eye view. If you were to respond with something like, well, let me tell you about it again. So listen to what I say. Then you're probably not going to have the same level of rapport as if you use the same language as they do. Hopefully that's making sense to you. So when it comes to auditory language, there are some phrases that you might find those people using more regularly. To voice an opinion, clear as a bell. I know that's certainly something I say sometimes. Blabbermouth, I don't. I think that's an American thing, so I've never heard anyone say blabbermouth. But rings a bell. Someone says, yeah, rings a bell. That's kind of an auditory thing. Again, you don't just want to take one of these as gospel. You want to listen out for a few of these phrases or words to surface, and then you can take an educated guess that they're either going to respond to auditory language or not. Okay. So here's some phrases. So maybe you're thinking about people that you work with, right? People that you're surrounded by, or people that you're close to on a day-to-day basis, and you're probably trying to categorize them a little bit and think, oh, okay, I can see how my colleague is actually a visual person or an auditory person now. And maybe there's that person who you would like to build rapport with and you can't quite get there. So just consider using some of these phrases more regularly in your conversations with them. And you can really have fun with this because you're not going to risk upsetting anyone. It's just really you're playing with language which is naturally pleasing to the people that you're communicating with. So next time you speak with someone, maybe later today, if you're having a conversation with someone, just kind of listen out and try and make a judgment. Is this person visual? Is this person auditory? Is this person kinesthetic? And then try out some visual, auditory, or kinesthetic phrases. It's as simple as that. And just see what happens. Listen out for changes in the conversation, or maybe it will just feel different to you. I don't know. So the kinesthetic language patterns, if you will, or phrases, I should say, these come up a lot, actually. I think must deal with a lot of kinesthetic people. What this all boils down to, get my drift, control yourself, lay cards on the table, sharp as a knife, walk me through it. All these are words that suggest someone is more of a kinesthetic learner or kinesthetic communicator. Someone says, I'm not following you. I'm not sure I'm following you. And go, well, that's fine. Let me walk you through it, for example. You see how that works? Now, obviously, you need to be a bit switched on, and it all comes down to active listening, as I've said a couple of times now. But have fun with it. Okay? So let's see this in action, right? So we're going to look at a short, I think it's about a 7-minute clip, or I'm going to cut it halfway through because that's where the rapport building takes place. This is taken from an episode of a Darren Brown show, where he's gone out in public and he's going to attempt to build rapport with a complete stranger without talking to them. So he's not going to use language or tone of voice. He's actually just going to look at the body language aspect of it. Okay. Now I've done this. It's really, really good fun. And again, it's something that you can do as long as you do it in a safe environment. So I'll cut this off, and you just want to pay attention to how he's building rapport with the individual, and then he's going to do something really interesting. He's going to get the other person to start mirroring him. And all that will become clear over the next few minutes. So enjoy. Hopefully you can hear this. If you can't, I'll put a link in this to the video below.
I wanted to take a member of the public who had no idea that he was being targeted and see if I could make him do something completely unexpected and out of character, possibly even break the law. This small cafe was the perfect size to find the target. Rigged with hidden cameras, including a camera in my glasses, it was just a matter of time before someone came in. My idea is to use a technique called mirroring. This will enable me to have some control over their actions. The first stage of mirroring involves trying to copy the other person's body movements so that we get into sync with each other. It often takes several attempts before I find the right person. It wasn't her. Once I'm mirroring them, I'll try to lead their actions so that they're copying my actions without being aware of it. After a while, a third person appears. After 20 minutes, I've got this guy in sync with me, so now I'm going to try and lead his actions. He's now copying me without realizing it, and I'm going to try and make him feel sleepy. Sleeper agents were used by both sides during the Cold War, the ultimate goal being to control the minds of these agents.
Okay, so I'll skip it there because it goes on to the other second half of the program. But quite simply, that's in action at quite an advanced level. He would have done it for some time, and as you saw, it doesn't work on everybody every time, but that's taking it to the extreme. But I would certainly like to suggest that if you're spending 20 minutes, half hour, an hour into a meeting with somebody, that you should be able to take just one or two aspects of their physiology or their tonality or their language, just one or two. You don't need to copy everything that they do. That will become obvious, and the key here is to be subtle, right? So just take one or two components. You take note of maybe, I noticed their posture and the language they use, like the audio-visual kinesthetic language. I will match and mirror that. Okay, I'd rather you become an expert at mirroring one or two aspects of somebody's body language, because that would be much more powerful than you trying to taking to board everything that we've covered here and try and apply it all at once. That's going to be really, really difficult. Nigh impossible, I'd even suggest. But I think the most important thing is that you have fun with this. It's inoffensive and it's really, really powerful stuff and useful for whether you're in sales, regardless of what you sell, who you sell it to, or whoever you're communicating with. Okay, so that's it really. If you've got any questions on that, feel free to email me if you want to go over specifically how you can build some of these skills, because there's a lot more to it than I could cover in an hour, but I think you've pretty much got the basis of it. What's really important is that you try to apply it when you speak with people, and you can do so whether you're in a work environment or not. So really, as I said before, have fun with it. Be the best that you can be, really. Look after one another and yourselves, and I'll see you on the next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.